the problems of our economic productivity in our country is the lack of available, decent, workable roles for women in the economy.
Welcome everyone to Political Sandbox by Chamber UK, hosted in partnership with 50/50 Parliament. For today's special episode with Shadow Minister for Domestic Violence and Safeguarding, Jess Phillips. The focus of this sandbox is to highlight gender inequality in public life. We'll speak about some of the ways that elected office can become more gender equal and the importance of having a 50/50 representation in the corridors of power. If you find these videos useful, please subscribe. You can also visit our website at chamberuk.com. So, good morning, Jess.
Hello.
Nice to be with you today. Before we dive into the details of this conversation, I wanted to ask you, why do you think this conversation is important to have? What kind of gender inequalities do you kind of see in the public space, and what can we do more to support women who want to, stand in office?
So, I mean, the reason it's important to have good representation is because there is inequality in society. Now, it doesn't follow necessarily that just you get it right in the House of Commons and the job is done. The reason for getting it right in the House of Commons and having a 50/50 Parliament, or, better representation across all protected groups, is that then those people make better decisions for the people in the country. So every major, apart from, there's one piece of legislation, and that is the abortion legislation, which was initially moved by a man. But every piece of legislation that has advanced women in our country, so things like stuff around child benefits, family allowances, childcare, women's rights in the labour force, equal pay, every single thing, every right that I have relied on throughout my life as a young working mom before I was elected to Parliament was created for me. Every protection was created for me by a woman in Parliament. So I think even the man who passed the abortion legislation would say he couldn't have done it without the women who were there supporting him. So that's why it matters. It isn't just a tick box exercise to make the photos look good, which I'm afraid to say political parties are guilty of all the time, of just making a load of women turn up for a photo shoot. I've flanked male politicians in the past to make sure that the photo looked all right. Never flank anyone. Never agree to be in a photo to make your organisation look good without making a demand that goes with it on behalf of womankind. That it's not for the sake of the photo. It's not so that people on Twitter don't go, oh, this is a sausage fest of a meeting. It matters. It matters because it changes things for people in our country. Black women are much more likely to be raising the issues of black women. So it is the black women in Parliament who are fiercely campaigning around maternity discrimination that has led to it being more likely that black women die in labour, for example. It's not to say that other people can't care about that, but if you don't feel it in your life in the same way and know it on a visceral level, then you're not going to fight for it in the same way. And that can come from where you live as much as it comes from your other characteristics, because you're growing up around various different things. What do I know about rural communities? Absolutely naffle. I know nothing, and if everybody in Parliament was like me, rural communities would be served terribly poorly. Because I'd be like, I don't know, it's a field. What do I know? It's really important for the people in our country to be properly represented, and that's why it matters. We are more than half the population. We should get more than half the seats. 50/50 is not good enough for me. 52.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you kind of touched on representation and inclusion as well. Obviously, we are a very multicultural like nation, so we need to make sure that we have people from each of those like communities, whichever ones we belong to,
People from
in
different
office,
classes is the thing. I think
everything.
that I think class is the and one thing I really hate about the conversation about class is that people assume that when you're talking about working class people, you're talking about white working class people,
No.
as if black and Asian people
Don't
aren't, or
exist, yeah.
working class black and Asian people, and also similarly as if middle class black and Asian people don't exist as well. Like that,
exactly.
It's like they're a community over here, and class sits over here in a conversation about white people.
No, it's all intersectional. It's actually all intersectional.
It's the same people.
Yeah.
But class is the great. I would say class is the great, one of the great divides still today, and in many ways that's getting worse.
Yeah,
I would say that is getting worse over the years. Whereas in most other areas, with regard to race, disability moves incredibly slowly. Disability representation. But it's still better than it has been before. But in class, I actually think we have fewer working class MPs than we used to.
Yeah.
There was a massive movement in the sort of 60s and 70s of, certainly within the Labour movement of, your miners and nurses ending up in Parliament.
Okay, so could you talk to me a bit about your like political journey as well? Like what's kind of inspired you so where you are right now, like how have you really gotten here and what inspired you to take that first step in elected office?
Yeah, well, genuinely the inspiration was I thought I could do better than the people who were doing it. And I don't think women say that enough.
Fair enough,
I was working at Women's Aid before I was elected. And it was during the time that the then government, which was the Cameron government, were privatising probation, and I ran female offenders services across the West Midlands. And I just saw really bad examples of policy making that didn't have the people they were making the policy for at the heart of it.
Yeah.
And I went to some meetings where I basically lost my imposter syndrome because I thought, oh my God, these people don't know what they're talking about, and I do. So, I should go and talk about violence against women and girls and female offenders, and I should go and sort of push myself. That was the thing that pushed me over. But long before that, I was raised in a political family, and I know that that's not the case for the vast majority of people. Although at the moment, I would say people's families are more politicised than they've been at most points in my life, which happens actually when governments have been in power for a long time. So I obviously was born and raised in the Thatcher years. And so it felt like politics was at the very surface of absolutely everything in our lives. And that it feels like we're at that point again where the general population are deeply invested in political systems, policies and things. So I was raised in a family where if something wasn't right, we were raised to believe that it was nobody else's responsibility. It's funny, it's actually quite a conservative view, isn't it? Even though I was raised by what could only be described as borderline communists. They're very, very strong socialists, but at time it could definitely have been seen to tip in one direction. But it's quite a conservative view to believe in the idea of personal responsibility. But we were raised that if something is wrong, don't wait around for somebody else to sort it out. Roll your sleeves up and get on with it.
And I guess that's what you did. So kind of kicked off your
and so then journey. I was, it came about really. The Labour Party approached me to stand as a local councillor because I had raised in this environment of sort of political activism and community activism and union activism all my life. There was some terrible incidences of antisocial behaviour and arson on the street where I was living. So a set of fires over a period of about 6 weeks. There was sort of 10 fires, people's cars being set on fire and things. And people were frightened. And so I did loads of organising in the community to bring people back together and to hold events and to tidy up the streets and to make sure people were informed about the crime that had been happening, make sure that those who had power were held accountable to us, and that the community was heard. And I won an award for it and for the work that I did. And the Labour Party got in touch with me and said, would you consider running to be a councillor in your local area after you've done all this work? Because at the time, the Labour Party were really, really keen on moving away from the sort of idea of the sort of polished professional, the Whitehall SPAD special advisor turned into. So they were basically going out and looking for people like me, and they found me, and I was a member of the Labour Party, so then I so I ran to be a local councillor, and then obviously the sort of progression, the seat that I represent now was represented by the Liberal Democrats, and again the Labour Party really, really encouraged me to stand at the time. And Ed Miliband, this was, they really, the sort of Labour Party machine were like, we think that you would be a good MP. So actually a very different story in lots of cases to lots of women trying to crack into it is that they find the doors are shut in their face.
So it's quite surprising.
And funnily enough, in both instances of the sort of pestering me to be an elected representative at both local and national level, it was a man who did it. It was a man who actively asked me to do it, asked me to stand.
So I guess the ask in this context is for our men in our lives to kind of 100%. look, as a man, like what, if you know that there's a woman in your life or in your community that is able to do these similar things to what Jess has done. I do it every
time. Anyone can speak in public, even slightly.
Yeah.
I was at a meeting yesterday with the amazing families of families and people who had directly been affected by terror incidences. All the families of the Manchester bombing, the 7/7, the Fishmongers Hall attack and the Westminster attack, and they're all there, these amazing women and men who are all just there representing their families, fighting for something better for other people who might suffer this in the future. And this one woman stood up and she gave, it was the two of the people who stood up in the room, a man and a woman, spoke better than any of the politicians. And I was immediately to both of them, I was like, have you ever considered running for office? Like, I will literally ask anyone. The postman shows me any sign of political, I'm like, have you considered running? I'm constantly trying to get people to run for office if they show any sort of iota of interest, even people who aren't from my political persuasion. I think it's really, really important. I mean, these people yesterday all were, but it's getting harder to find. But I really try and push people. So if I meet, often I meet women, and women will approach me from places where the Labour Party, classically are never going to win. And I actually, I think that sort of tribalism about your political party. Now, I was raised with it. To me, it's like religion. I can't rid myself of that. Even if I tried, and boy, the Labour Party has really tried me at times. I can't get rid of it. Yeah. And so for me, there is a tribal element. There is an element of that tribal. But I meet women who are brilliant community activists, or are brilliant heads of organisations, or brilliant just leaders. I meet them all the time, whether that's how they'd identify themselves. And I don't really care whether you feel deeply about one political party or another. Find the one that's closest. Yeah. I don't agree with the Labour Party all the time. Once a day at least, I disagree with them. So you've got to, don't rule yourself out if you didn't grow up in the sort of environment I did, where, you'd have been, kicked out. The Labour Party. I could do anything. I could have married anyone. I could have, sexuality, not a problem. Whatever, bring anyone home, do anything.
So quite liberal.
Totally liberal. Had I been a conservative, I imagine that would have definitely been I think I would have still been invited, but sparingly.
Sparingly.
Yeah.
Okay. So now just going on to the APPG. So we know that you co-chair that with Flick Drummond, and recently there were some reports that came out. So like based on the findings of those reports, what kind of systemic barriers do you feel like women face in like joining the labour market or re-entering after like maternity leave?
There is always the one fatal thing, the fatality of our wombs is is basically, and I'm going to write 20 reports while I'm a member of parliament that say the same thing until something is finally done about this. Is that the fundamental issue of the fact that women are childbearers, and no science coming along anytime soon to stop that. So I won't hope for that Hail Mary. Too late for me. I've already ruined my back. But the real problem of career breaks that then lead to an isolation from the labour market, either what women feel themselves because of the
mental side.
Well, also just you feel totally pulled, don't you? Feel like you're not doing a good enough job in either. And even women as confident as me, as frankly, as cocksure as me, I felt it, still feel it. Like, my son, it's half term at the moment, so my son, who's 14, and frankly only came to London with me because he wanted to meet Lorraine Kelly, which he did this morning. But he, I've got to work today, and so I like put him on a tube train. He doesn't come from London. I put him on a tube and was like, go back to the flat, like you'll get there. And, as the doors shut on it, I'm constantly like, oh, my life choices and how they affect my kids. It's every day, and so women often, the response to that, because women earn less, is for them to work less, even if that wasn't the choice they wanted to make. Or the women who go off and have dazzling careers like me, I feel constantly like my kids can get away with absolute bloody murder because I feel guilty. My husband's never had a moment's guilt. So we need a cultural change in that environment, but we won't get that until women stop feeling. So the first thing that needs to happen is men need to do 50% of the domestic labour in the world. That would make an enormous difference. So hope springs eternal. Never going to see that, but let's hope that happens one day. It happens in my house. If anything, my husband would be delighted if I did 50%. He'd consider that a win. But there's got to be a fundamental shift in the law that actually protects women from the discrimination. So that's the internal, and that's going to take a huge amount of change. But there is fundamental discriminations that occur to women when taking time or working part-time, or even the expectation that they might, just a woman of a certain age is a risk to look at, because you're like in an interview, you'd be like, she's going to take time off. Like, oh gosh, the logistics, all of that's still going on. Yeah. It feels like something I would have had to say in the 1970s, still happening every single day. And until we fundamentally make it so that is so pernicious for an employer to do, that they are frightened of the consequences, then I'm afraid to say that's still going to go on. The other systemic problem is care in our country. Care both at every end of the spectrum, whether it's childcare, whether it's care for disabled family members, and because we forget that huge numbers of people in care in our country are not elderly people; they are adults. And care at the end of life, that still all falls to women, both in organised sectors that actually, paid work is being done by women on very, very low pay, as well as it's being done, the lowest pay possible, completely no pay, by women all over the country are doing that caring responsibility. And until we fundamentally change that system and ensure that there is free care for those that need it, both childcare and adult care, I'm afraid to say we'll be having the same conversations about barriers to re-entry, barriers to entry. We know the problems.
You've pretty much answered my next three questions. I was just going to ask, so, in your opinion, would you say, there's enough being done to support women, or if there isn't, like what kind of things, where do we start with that kind of conversation?
The fundamental thing that you have to support women is you have to have women making the decisions about what will support women.
Yeah.
So, and that's not just about the things that I just identified. It has to be about the economy. It has to be. We have to build an economy. We spend billions every year and huge amounts of political bandwidth talking about, for example, how to make our economy more sustainable environmentally. Like, I could swing a cap for the amount of people working on that at the moment. Like, you're going to hit them. They're everywhere. Like, that is the big buzz thing. And it's right, because there's money in them there hills of green technology. I just want the same level of political capital and commitment into recognising that one of the problems of our economic productivity in our country is the lack of available, decent, workable roles for women in the economy, and the trillions of free labour that is provided. So unless we build an economy, like even just our industrial strategy as a country should have a specific bit about women's work. Just a thought. Just a thought. Half the population in a country with terribly low productivity. Maybe give it some thought. So, it needs to not just be announceables. Politicians, especially in the current, in the last, and this is not a political dig at conservatism in and of itself, because I think, when I was a kid, conservatism was anti-feminist, like openly and proudly anti-feminist. That is not the situation today. Theresa May's Conservative Party versus Margaret Thatcher, it's unrecognisable, actually, in the idea of being a feminist and fighting and wanting women in the economy and all of that. But what has been the problem is short-termism, the political turmoil of the last 10 years, whether it's Brexit, changing prime ministers. What we get is governments giving announceable things. And so, on International Women's Day, this is absolutely bloody classic, and mark my words, it's going to happen. There'll be some announcement. There'll be some short-term announcement. It'll either be about violence against women and girls. It'll be like, we're going to put like 2 million quid into something, or it'll be about, about child, something to do with child. We're going to do a review in child. It'll be something really like, so that they've got a headline. And like all governments fall foul of this. So, it's not necessarily just a criticism, but it does happen when there is short-termism. It needs to be properly embedded. I don't want little announceables about women. I want the entire structure of BEIS, the department, or whatever the hell it's called this week, trade and business, to have at its core 50% of the working population and how we drive it and how we make it work. It's not just like, it's the 7th of March.
Let's put the posters up.
Yeah,
tweets,
get a little announcement out.
Yeah.
It has to be a fundamental core principle of everything they do. When they're building HS2, they think about how the pipeline for women's apprenticeships are going to be, so that women would be working in a different economy to the one that they classically work in, which is classically lower paid. They need to get more men working in care, because then the pay in care would increase, because that's what happens. As soon as men start doing that work, the pay increases.
Unfortunately, that's just the way it is.
That's just the reality of the situation. So then they need to be thinking about how we're going to make sure women can use this enormous piece of infrastructure that we are building. How is it going to affect the lives of the women in London, the women in Birmingham, for the bit that they're... Like, none of that work has been done.
Considered. And it's such a huge project
as
well. Like, it's insane.
It's my taxpayer. It's women's money paying for it. Where's my dollar?
Yeah.
I want my pound of flesh. So it can't just be... And that's every government department. I could come up with the same thing. It can't just be that the Home Office goes, oh yes, X woman has been murdered on the street and everybody cares about it this week. So, here's a small part of money that we're going to throw at this. It has to be, it's the core principle of the Home Office. It should have basically 4 pillars. And one of those pillars is the safety and security of women in our country.
Because it seeps into...
Terrorism, security, women's security.
Yes.
It's costing the country £66 billion, £13 billion just in lost hours at work alone. Like, there you go, there's your £13 billion. There's £13 billion. You could get women back to work if they weren't being beaten up and raped. It's just not core enough. And it won't be core. It will never be core until 50% of the people who are doing it are women.
Love that. Thank you. So just moving on to like diversity and inclusion. I know we touched on it a bit earlier at the beginning. Do you think that there's a cross-party commitment to encourage diversity and inclusion?
Cross-party?
Yes.
On a skin level, there is cross-party push. And there are good actors in every party. There are good faith actors in without doubt. Whether, at anything above the sort of MPs working together on working groups in various things. So like, me and Maria Miller and Flick and people have we're constantly, and Baroness Verma, she's often in those meetings. There is quite a big push for that sort of diversity. And certainly, Marsha has been, amazing in trying to highlight the intersecting, as a black disabled woman, about how difficult it is for people like her to access it. So there's, there is the stuff that goes on, and we're in little groups with each other, and it goes on. Do the political parties do it together? No. I would be lying if I said that the political parties were hanging out and worrying about diversity together. I mean, I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. Within the political parties themselves, they will all have specific schemes. So the Labour Party has direct action in this space. We have positive discrimination in the case of women. And huge, sort of big efforts that get put into other intersecting groups. The Equality Act only allows for the positive discrimination in the case of women. It's literally written into the Equality Act. So we have asked for the Equality Act to be amended a number of times. Okay. One day.
Could you share your views on the need to encourage marginalised communities to enter elected office? So,
it's wildly important. So if I think of the most marginalised community in the place where I represent at the moment, without a shadow of a doubt, and I represent an incredibly diverse population of people, it's the Somali community. The British Somali community in my constituency are, without doubt, the most vulnerable and marginalised in my community at the moment. Is they're relatively compared to the community of my own family, the Irish community, the Kashmiri community, the Bangladeshi community, and the African Caribbean community, who we're no longer no community. We're talking 100 years gone by now of Birmingham being a place where those people live, and that and there is so few Somali activists, and I mean there's as best I know.
I'm trying to think.
There isn't a Somali member of Parliament, and certainly not like a British Somali member of Parliament to represent that community. So, for example, and what the hell do I know about it? Now, I can bring those people into my constituency, and I can represent them, and I can ask them. But fundamentally,
there's only so much.
Oh yeah, there's only so much, because and it matters. You can't be what you can't see, and it matters for them to be able to see that.
Absolutely, and even if you were, online, talking about the issues that affect the Somali community, at the end of the day, there may be some women or people that would be like, what does she know? She's not even Somalian.
100%.
How can she even say that?
I have that waged at me, rightly and wrongly. But the fundamental is correct, isn't it? I'm not Somali.
Yeah.
Definitely not Somali. So, that, and I think about that community, and I think about, when we had huge swathes of people coming over from places like Poland, And I think actually about communities that have gone before and how important they knew, certainly Black and Asian communities, they knew that political power was something that they had. I don't feel that with a lot of marginalised communities now. Like, I don't see a big effort in the Polish community where I live being like, okay, actually, if we want stuff,
we can actually,
we need to go and show real support for one person so that they do our bidding. Sounds awful. That is literally what representative democracy is.
Yeah,
like
don't
mean like with cash in envelopes. I mean like ask for the things that they want in Parliament.
Yeah.
That's literally what representative democracy is. So there are various communities, newer communities to the United Kingdom that I really feel like loads more work needs to be done
in empowering them.
But at the most basic level about voting, and harnessing their political capital, which others have done. The Irish community did it, the Black community have done it. Certainly the Asian community where I am, there's absolutely no denying that they've got some political capital. That it's really, 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 really important that those people are represented and that they're making decisions about the places that they live.
Just on a slight tangent on that, you mentioned these smaller communities that have done these things to kind of acquire their political currency or power. Yeah. What kind of key offerings or takeaways do you think other communities who are looking to acquire that, can take from that?
I think that you look at representation is one thing. So actually, representation in Black and Asian people in my lifetime has vastly improved.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, Diane Abbott and Keith Vaz, Bernie, but if you can name them, like now, it would be harder.
Yeah.
There's a lot more Black and Asian people.
Yeah.
And then if you go down to a council level, it's even more and more and more. So, like, representation, it really, really, truly matters. What I would say is find the issues that are fundamental that you wish to campaign about that are specific. I mean, they don't have to be, when I say specific to your community, like, I work in violence against women and girls, and every Somali woman I ever talk to, they are always like, oh, all anyone ever wants to talk to us about is FGM. It's like, we are also interested in schools.
Yeah.
Roads. So be careful not to.
Just like,
yeah,
kind
like
of stereotype. Like you're Somali and you must have gone through like FGM. Like,
exactly.
No, I actually want to fit the pothole like down my road.
I just want my kids to get into the
good schools and like the catchment areas. Yes, absolutely.
It's a really difficult thing that happens.
So understanding that people from these marginalised communities, like,
they care about the same things.
Yeah.
I mean, often, what I would be wary of, is making sure that comes across, because so often you get, like, when geopolitics becomes part of it. So obviously I represent a huge number of Kashmiri people, British Kashmiri people, and there is a constant, basically war in Kashmir between Pakistan and India, and there are, to lots of people in my community, that really, really, really matters. But to lots more, the local roads matter considerably more.
A lot more, yes.
And making
sense.
Sure that you're not being misrepresented as your community on single issues, and that you feel like you can be embedded in what is happening actually
currently
in your neighbourhoods.
Yes.
I think is an important message to take away, because yes, you may as if you're from a refugee community, you may feel very strongly about campaigning about refugees. You may feel just as strongly about your bins. And by that I mean you feel stronger about your bins.
Yeah.
It's my experience on politics.
So
don't always feel like that winning political power has to be about your identity as the system currently sees you.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
Be the local governor of your school.
I love that.
Like, be the, it doesn't have to be about, the civil war in Somalia.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't have to be the champion or ambassador for kind of like fighting those things.
It's about Polish women. It doesn't have to be about, EU settled status or Brexit. Do you know what I mean? It can just be about the fact that there is a big Polish community, and actually, like, that we care about all the exact same things. But what we have that does identify us from a specific community is, in politics, the only thing that matters: learn to count. So if you are big in number in an area, use that big number to fight for the things that you care about.
Exactly.
Like, numbers matter in politics. Learn to count. If you can't win the meeting, don't go into it. So, yes, don't walk into a meeting unless you know that you have the number of people that you need to win that meeting. And so, it's... One person comes to me and says, that they're upset about, like, whether the local school's doing the right thing about something. They come to me and say, with 20 people, and say, we in the Polish community feel like we're not...
You're gonna I'm like
you're
that. Gonna listen.
I'm gonna be like that. Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems mercenary, doesn't it? But it's politics we're talking about. We're not talking about, like, I'm a community activist and I just want everyone to be happy and live in peace and all that. But we are talking about the institution of politics. It's a game to a certain degree. Numbers matter.
Great. So, just talking about creating a more equal democracy. So, like, let's look to the future. Can you share, like, any existing work that you think is, in order to help us in the future? What's kind of going on right now? What do you feel like, what kind of work is going on that will encourage change for a more equal democracy?
Look, I think across the board in political institutions and in our big institutions, whether government or business, I think we've won the argument. I think that we've won the argument.
As in everyone agrees that
representation matters. Like, and I say that, like, we've won the argument now. Like, you only win the argument until you start losing it. And there's always a backlash. If you look at the Me Too movement, where it felt like we were winning the argument, well, whoa, has there been a backlash, introducing Andrew Tate and the incel movement. Like, so, there is always a backlash. So, women, we don't get to a certain point and then rest there. You have to maintain it, unfortunately. But luckily, we're giving away our labour free all the time. We used to working quite hard to get the same as somebody who worked less hard. So that's fine.
We're not new to this.
I'm over the fact that I have to do that now.
Yeah.
I'm just going to crack on with it.
Yeah.
But I think we should have hope in the fact that years and years of feminist activism across all parts of society has won the argument around representation. Certainly for women, I think there's actually, I think the group that has the hardest battle and the longest way to go still is, and are frankly the most discriminated against in work, is disabled people with disabilities. I still think it's a terrible environment in that space. But on the point of view of women, we have won the argument. It's now the work that has to go on for that actually to mean something.
And who's responsible for that? Like,
well, the governments are responsible. Well, I go back to where we started with my parents. We're all responsible for it. Like, literally everybody has a responsibility. So, you look down the barrel of a camera and you say to men, if you know a woman, they have a responsibility. You and I have a responsibility to put in the work and the effort. Again, like, we're just going to have to get over the fact that we have to do that, but whatever. Like, it's very tiring, isn't it, being in a marginalised group? Because you have to constantly educate people about how you're a marginalised group. And, like, sometimes I just don't care. I just want to watch the Bake Off.
I feel you on that.
Sometimes, like, when there's something major going on, I haven't got the bandwidth to make you feel better about the fact that shit things happen to women today. And after the Black Lives Matter movement, I just thought, oh God, black people must be so tired of having to make white people feel better about this.
I turned my messaging off. I said I'm not doing it anymore.
Just like,
I'm not doing it.
So tired. Sometimes I fundamentally just don't care about everything. I can't. And sometimes I'm like, oh yes, this bad thing has happened, but I'm having a day off. So please let me just, play on my phone. But we, fundamentally, we always get back to it, and we know that we've got to do the work. But our institutions and our laws, and ultimately our government, they hold so many powerful levers. They should pull them. When we think about what happened during COVID and how so many levers that never got pulled really quickly and instantly, and with fervour and with certainty in their hearts. And then we think about what's happening in Ukraine, and again, levers can be pulled when we feel it in our hearts and we feel like it has to happen. Well, they can pull the levers that would make it better and to make us live in a more equal society. It just, so ultimately it's the government. They won't ever do that, going back to, again, make sure you've got the numbers, until we are strong in voice about it. Yeah. They're frightened of us. Politicians are frightened of voters.
Yeah, there's
harness that power.
Numbers,
power in numbers.
Yeah.
Well, there's loads of us. Loads of us.
Yeah.
We're literally more.
Yeah.
I say to my husband, how is it that there's more of us and yet you still end up on top?
Yeah.
How is that it's happened? And he's like, just upper body strength. Can reach things on shelves. It's like those strong arms have meant you dominated the bloody world. Those bloody strong arms and wombs.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Funny enough, I was saying to my brother, because he it's always that guys usually train arms and upper body, and then women at the gym we usually train lower body. Yeah, and it makes it, and so we have no upper strength, and this is why
we should have worked on pull-ups.
I know. If only
we could go back 20,000 years. Yeah. And just be dudes, really work on that shoulders.
Okay, so
we could rule the world.
Honestly,
if we just reach
these,
things slightly higher.
So how do you think 50-50 representation will influence policy making and democracy? So, looking 15 years from now.
Look, I think that there are amazing actors in what we were saying about who's got a responsibility. There are brilliant campaigning groups that are out there trying to keep on pushing this happening. And you always need those linchpin people. And so it's really, really vitally important that the sort of campaigns around equal representation here and around the world keep pushing. Look, I think that if we had a 50-50 representative parliament, it would, I'll be honest, it would only be a start. It isn't just, because 50% men, 50% women, if they were all the same sort of men and women from the same backgrounds and the same schools, it would make no bloody difference to anybody, would it? I mean, it would be really good for maybe the women from those communities.
Yeah, great for them, but all the other women,
yeah, that's it. But it feels like it's a never ever let perfect be the enemy of good. So we have to strive, first of all, to get the 50-50 representation, which frankly is the very least we should be asking for. We should be considerably crosser. And, at that point, you have to sit back and then readdress, okay, what else now needs doing? The thing about activism and equality in the world is, and I think the sort of much misquoted Martin Luther King quote about how the sort of arc of justice always bends. He goes on then to say that only if you keep it that way, it takes work to keep improving. I will never see total equality in my life, and even if I did, I'd still think that there was more to do. There's always gonna be a group that gets marked. It's human nature, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody being marginalised. There's always going to be a friction between one set of groups' rights and another. That's and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. And so, there's always going to be work to do. So, I am hopeful for the future. I think that not by the time I leave Parliament, but by the time I die, I think Parliament would be 50-50.
Great.
And that's me being incredibly hopeful, because I don't think women will have equal pay by the time I die, for example.
Oh, great.
But I do think
that
will happen.
Yeah.
And then that's the launch pad for the next thing to happen, isn't it? That's that's the thing. It has to.
Well,
work is never done. Don't rest.
Yeah.
Do sometimes have a day off.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jess, for speaking with us today. It's been really, really great catching up and speaking with you. So you can join the conversation following us on Chamber Voice, on Instagram at Chamber UK, and you can also visit our website, www.chamberuk.com, 5050parliament.co.uk.